Picture this: a medieval courtroom packed with tension. A woman is on trial for witchcraft, but not for the usual accusations of curses or flying on broomsticks. No, her supposed crime is stealing men's genitals and keeping them in a bird's nest as if they were tiny pets, feeding them oats and corn. At the very same time, across town, a pig is facing its own prosecution, charged with having sexual relations with its owner. If the court finds them guilty, both the man and the pig will burn together at the stake. And in yet another corner of town, the local brothel is buzzing. Prostitutes are slipping on their required yellow hoods adorned with bells, preparing for the emperor's arrival. As part of the welcome ritual, they will theatrically bind him with golden chains, a symbolic capture staged in his honor. This was medieval sexuality, so strange and unsettling that for centuries, historians practically looked the other way, dismissing these well-documented episodes as too absurd to be true. Forget the tidy picture you've been taught of meek peasants and gallant knights. The reality was far more twisted. Imagine a legal system where a wife could be ordered by the court to manually stimulate her husband in front of witnesses to determine if he was impotent. Or a medical establishment where doctors prescribed orgasms as treatment for a woman's so-called wandering womb. Even worse, the law could decide that if a woman became pregnant after an assault, it proved she must have enjoyed it, meaning it wasn't really an assault in the eyes of the court. None of this is rumor or myth. These practices are recorded in court documents, medical treatises, and legal codes. And you're about to step into that world, a society that not only tolerated such customs, but built entire systems of law, medicine, and morality around them. So let's begin with the power that dictated it all: the Catholic Church and its unrelenting hold over the intimate lives of medieval Christians. Picture yourself married in 13th century France. You want to lie with your spouse, the person the church bound to you, in holy matrimony. Seems simple, right? Not even close. The church had drawn up a sexual calendar so complicated that modern historians have resorted to creating charts to keep track of it. Sundays? Absolutely not. That was the Lord's Day. Fridays? Forbidden, since Christ died on that day. Thursdays? Off limits in honor of the Last Supper. Forget about intimacy during Lent, 40 full days, or during Advent for weeks. And then there were the countless feast days scattered throughout the year, each of them shutting the bedroom door on couples. And it didn't stop there. If your wife was menstruating, intimacy was banned. She was considered ritually unclean. Had she just given birth? No touching for 40 days. Was she breastfeeding? Some priests ruled that was off limits too, warning that sex would taint the milk and endanger the child. A German penitential even prescribed 3 years of fasting on bread and water for couples who dare to break this rule. When medieval scholars added everything up, the result was staggering. A truly devout Christian couple might lawfully share a bed less than once a week. Even when the calendar gave its rare approval, the act itself was smothered by regulation. Only one position was sanctioned: missionary. Anything else, literally anything, was branded sodomy and punished with severe penance. Woman on top, 40 days of fasting. Dog-like style, 3 full years. Any position that blocked the possibility of conception, 7 years of penance. According to the canons of Theodore, a 7th century manual still relied upon throughout the Middle Ages, spilling seed into the mouth wasn't just sinful, it was labeled a crime worse than murder or even heresy itself. And the rules didn't end with positions. Even the manner of intimacy was policed. Too much pleasure was sinful. Making noise? Sinful. Taking too long? Sinful. One French bishop even declared penance for couples who clung too long in embraces or displayed excessive affection. According to these church manuals, the ideal Christian sexual encounter was supposed to be short, quiet, joyless, and carried out purely out of marital duty. No love, no passion, no pleasure. Yet here's the twist. The very priests and bishops who thundered against lust were themselves frequenting brothels. So common was their behavior that the church began taxing it. The system was called the collegium, essentially a fornication fee. Pay the bishop a set annual sum, and you could keep a mistress without further interference. The hypocrisy is breathtaking, and we have receipts to prove it. In England and Germany, church account books record these payments side by side with tithes, burial fees, and baptisms, as routine as anything else. In the Diocese of Norwich in 1450, the collegium appears neatly sandwiched between income from funerals and christenings. In certain German regions, fully one-third of parish priests were making these payments, and the corruption stretched beyond parish life. Monasteries, which were supposed to stand as fortresses of chastity and holiness, often became dens of scandal. When clergy were exposed in serious transgressions, the punishments could be brutal, even shocking. Take the case of the nun of Watton, recorded by Aelred of Rievaulx in 12th century England. Now imagine the convent at Watton. A young nun, placed there as a child against her will, found herself pregnant by a lay brother. When her secret came out, the other nuns did not simply expel her or quietly report the scandal up the chain of command. Instead, they dragged her lover in front of her and forced her, yes, forced her, to castrate him with her own hands. According to Aelred's account, the horror didn't end there. One senior nun snatched the severed organs, still dripping with blood, and rammed them into the pregnant girl's mouth. But the chronicle doesn't stop at cruelty. It veers into the unbelievable. It claims that after this grotesque ritual, her pregnancy vanished overnight. The abbey declared it a miracle, a sign of divine forgiveness, and welcomed her back as though she had been purified. To them, this wasn't brutality. It was penance, a twisted form of spiritual cleansing. And while the church was sanctioning ordeals like that, medieval medicine was making everything worse. Physicians clung to disastrously wrong ideas about reproduction. Borrowing from ancient Greek authorities, they believed women needed to orgasm in order to conceive, a notion called the two-seed theory. Both man and woman, they argued, had to emit seed for pregnancy to happen. William of Conches, tutor to the future Henry II, spelled it out clearly in the 1150s. No mutual pleasure, no conception. This theory bled straight into the courtroom with devastating results. If pregnancy required female pleasure, then conception was proof of consent. A legal text from 13th century England puts it in chillingly plain words. If she should have conceived by the rape, the charge must be dropped, for without a woman's consent, she could not conceive. Think about the cruelty of that logic. A woman suffers an assault, becomes pregnant, and the very evidence of her violation is twisted into proof that she wanted it. And this wasn't some marginal belief. It was mainstream law across Europe. We have trial records from England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire showing judges dismissing charges on these grounds. Take the case of Lady Isabel Butler in 15th century Ireland. She was abducted, assaulted repeatedly, and forced into marriage with her attacker. When she became pregnant, the court declared it could not have been rape. Her captor remained her lawful husband. Meanwhile, the same medical establishment prescribing pleasure as proof was also recommending it as a cure. Doctors warned that women who went too long without sex risked a condition they called womb suffocation or hysteria. They believed the uterus could wander through the body, triggering fainting, mood swings, or seizures. Their solution? For married women, frequent intercourse. For widows or the unmarried, midwives were tasked with manually stimulating them until the necessary release occurred. In short, medieval medicine normalized medicalized orgasms centuries before the invention of the vibrator in the 1800s. That device may seem like a product of the modern world, but its origins trace back to these bizarre medieval practices about the wandering womb. If anything captures the absurd spectacle of sexuality in this period, though, it's the so-called trial by Congress. Whenever a wife petitioned for annulment on the grounds of her husband's impotence, French courts demanded proof. Their method? Force the couple to attempt intercourse in front of witnesses. The ritual was humiliatingly detailed. The couple would be brought to a private chamber, often within a bishop's palace. A panel of matrons, older women deemed experts, would begin by inspecting the husband's genitals for defects. They might even try to rouse him by hand to check his capability. If the results were inconclusive, then came the ultimate test. The couple was ordered in a bed, curtains drawn with small gaps left open so observers could watch. They were expected to attempt full intercourse while witnesses monitored every stage: erection, penetration, and completion. The pressure was unbearable. One infamous case, the Marquis affair of 1659, turned into the scandal of Paris. Pamphlets and mocking verses spread across the city about whether the Marquis could rise to the occasion. He failed miserably over and over again. Court records describe him collapsing under the matron's stairs, wilting like a flower despite his desperate attempts. Ironically, he later remarried and fathered children, proof that the entire system was absurd and deeply flawed. When it came to sexual crimes in the Middle Ages, punishment wasn't meant to be quiet or private. It was staged as a public spectacle of humiliation. Take adultery. Under the laws of King Canute in 11th century England, a woman caught cheating wasn't simply shamed or fined. Her nose and ears were sliced off. Brutal, yes, but also deliberate. The nose in particular carried symbolic weight. Disfigure it, and you erase a woman's beauty for life, permanently branding her as a sexual offender. Archaeologists have even uncovered skeletal remains of women bearing these exact mutilations. It wasn't just a threat, it was a punishment actually carried out. But perhaps the strangest aspect of medieval justice was the way courts prosecuted animals for sexual crimes. Bestiality was viewed as the vilest of sins, worse than incest, sodomy, or even murder. Both the human and the animal were considered guilty, and both faced death by fire. And here's the unbelievable part. The animals went through actual trials. They were given defense attorneys, witnesses spoke on their behalf, and judges pronounced verdicts with full solemnity. We have the records to prove it. In 16th century France, a man named Jacques Ferrand stood accused of relations with a female donkey. He was convicted and burned alive. But the donkey's fate was different. Villagers came forward to defend her, testifying to her innocence and good nature. The court ruled she had been forced and showed no sign of complicity. She was acquitted and returned to her owner, while Ferrand perished at the stake. Elsewhere, the logic worked differently. In Normandy, a cow was burned alongside its human violator. In French provinces, pigs were repeatedly executed for unnatural relations. One infamous pig in 1386 was even dressed in human clothing before being put to death, a grotesque pageant meant to drive home the idea that the beast had participated in human sin. To the medieval mind, a tainted animal had to be destroyed to purge the community of spiritual pollution. Homosexuality was persecuted with equal intensity, and the methods were just as bizarre. In Venice, sodomites were tied between two columns at high tide and left to drown as the waters slowly rose. In Spain, Burning at the stake was the standard penalty. But in Florence, repression became institutionalized with chilling efficiency. In 1432, the city created the Office of the Knight, a police force devoted solely to hunting men suspected of homosexual activity. Their methods were systematic, even bureaucratic. Officers patrolled meeting spots, collected anonymous denunciations from locked boxes scattered around the city, and sometimes sent young men as bait to entrap suspects. Over 70 years, they investigated 17,000 men, nearly half the adult male population of Florence, and secured 3,000 convictions. Their records are meticulous, noting who played the active role, who was passive, where the encounters happened, and how often. First-time offenders were fined. Repeat offenders could be branded, put in the pillory, or executed. During crises, persecution intensified. When the Black Death swept Europe in the 1340s, panic-stricken cities sought scapegoats among sexual sinners. In Bruges in 1348, a man named Jean Vanderden was burned alive, the court claiming his sodomy had poisoned the very air and triggered the plague. Similar executions echoed across Europe as terrified communities tried to appease God by eliminating anyone deemed sexually deviant. Even the mighty Knights Templar fell prey to this toxic blend of fear and accusation. In 1307, when King Philip IV of France decided to destroy the order and seize its immense wealth, he leveled sexual charges against them. He claimed initiates were required to kiss their superiors on the anus and participate in homosexual orgies. These allegations were almost certainly fabricated, but under torture the Templars confessed to anything. And the charges worked, because medieval society had already fused heresy with sexual corruption in the collective imagination. By the late medieval era, this anxiety reached fever pitch, merging sexuality with the supernatural. Nowhere is this clearer than in the Malleus Maleficarum, the witch-hunting manual of 1487. Obsessed with sexual imagery, it reveals more about the twisted minds of its authors than about any so-called witches. Among its most infamous claims, that witches could literally steal men's genitals through sorcery. The text states, word for word, witches can truly and actually remove men's members. And sometimes they collect many such members together, 20 or 30 at once, and put them in a bird's nest or in a box where they move about like living members and eat oats and corn. It sounds grotesque and absurd, but to medieval courts, this was deadly serious. Among the strangest tales recorded is one of a man who climbed a tree to recover his stolen penis from a witch's nest. The branches, according to the story, teemed with writhing members like fruit. When he tried to claim the largest one, the witch stopped him, explaining it belonged to the parish priest. What's most disturbing is that inquisitors didn't laugh this off as folklore. They accepted it as truth. Women were tortured until they confessed to such thefts, then executed for it. This belief even seeped into art. A mural from Massa Marittima in Tuscany, painted in 1265, shows women harvesting penises from a tree as if they were crops. Medieval manuscripts also carried the imagery. A 14th century illustration depicts a nun calmly plucking penises from branches and dropping them into a basket. And while we're at it, let's clear up some of the most persistent myths. First, the infamous droit du seigneur, the supposed right of a lord to sleep with peasant brides on their wedding night. Complete fabrication. Historians have never uncovered any credible evidence of such a law in medieval Europe. What peasants actually paid were marriage fees to their lords. Later writers twisted those payments into lurid stories of sexual rights, exaggerating the cruelty of the Middle Ages. Next, chastity belts. Also fake. Every so-called medieval chastity belt in museums has turned out to be a 19th century forgery or a Renaissance joke. The earliest known depiction shows up in a 1405 military manual, alongside fantasies like invisible armor and perpetual motion machines. It was satire, complete with a cheeky comment about spare keys. What was real, though, were the municipal brothels, stranger than any myth. Many cities operated government-regulated houses of prostitution, often with direct church involvement. In Southwark, London, the brothels were nicknamed the Bishop of Winchester's geese because he licensed them and pocketed the taxes. This same bishop preached fire and brimstone against fornication every Sunday, all while profiting from it. The regulations could be surreal. In Nuremberg, married men weren't allowed inside on Sundays. Pregnant prostitutes were sent away until after childbirth. In Milan, Jewish clients were forced to pay double. Prostitutes themselves were marked by clothing: yellow hoods with bells in Leipzig, black cloaks with yellow stripes in Milan. Even emperors were pulled into this theater of vice. When Frederick III entered Nuremberg in 1471, the city's prostitutes staged a bizarre welcoming ceremony. At the gates, they theatrically captured him with golden chains and only released him after he paid a ransom, a gesture he accepted with good humor. But the balance shattered in 1494 when syphilis appeared. Within 2 years, the disease had spread from Naples to Scotland. Its symptoms were horrifying: genital sores, body-wide rashes, flesh literally rotting from the face. Centuries-old brothels were shut down almost overnight. The pragmatic system of licensed vice crumbled in the face of a disease that made sex potentially fatal. Noble marriages collapsed when grooms showed signs of infection. Prostitutes were locked away in grim prison hospitals. And that, in many ways, is the real tragedy of medieval sexuality. For all its absurd rules and grotesque punishments, the system acknowledged one essential truth: people were going to have sex no matter what the church decreed. So it built outlets, confession and penance, regulated brothels, marriage as a sanctioned channel. Every brutal penalty, every bizarre belief, was really an attempt to impose order on the uncontrollable chaos of human desire. They failed, of course, but the remnants of that failure, the court records, penitential manuals, even the penis tree illustrations and manuscript margins, open a window into a world far stranger and far more human than we usually imagine. And if this unsettling journey through medieval sexuality left you reeling, wait until you hear about the scandals of the Borgia popes. That's when the most powerful religious leader on earth stopped even pretending to be celibate.